Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the world of participles in Latin. Now, if you're anything like my students, you'll probably mess up the name. Mine tend to call them particles, not science class, not what they are. And it's just a generally confusing topic for my younger Latin students because there's something that we don't necessarily use a lot or know a lot about in English. We use them, I shouldn't say that, but kind of English grammar being taught in schools has died off a little bit. So a lot of my students genuinely have no idea what these are, and it takes a little bit to understand how they're used. I will say participles are extremely common in Latin. They're really useful, honestly, and you see them all over the place. So you want to make sure that you understand them in order to kind of move forward. So the first question you should have is, what is a participle? And it's a verbal adjective. Now, if you're pausing for a second and you're confused on what I mean by that, how can it be a verbal adjective, right? Verbs and adjectives are two different things. Let's unpack and I'll explain what's going on here. So when we say a verbal adjective, the first part of that is verbal. And that's kind of easy because participles come from verbs, right? They're just forms of verbs. So they have an action behind them, right? Kind of makes sense. That's why we call them that. Now, the second part is adjective, right? Verbal adjectives. So the other side of participles is they're used to describe things. So you're basically using a verb to describe something, which again sounds odd, but it's really not that difficult to understand once you unpack it a little bit. Now, since they come from adjectives, participles have case, number, and gender, which can be a little tricky. That's why we don't learn them right away and at the start of a Latin curriculum. You have to be really good at adjectives and understand case, number, gender, so you can apply it to this, okay? But the first one we're going to start with is the present active participle, and that's what this video is all about. So let me just give you an example of what that would look like, okay? So if you said, Perseus saw the burning ship, right? Burning is a present active participle. So think about it. It comes from the verb to burn, right? But we're not using it as a verb. Nobody's burning anything here, right? We didn't say Perseus burned anything or anything like that. It's talking about the ship. It's describing the ship, right? What type of ship? Oh, the ship that is burning. That's why it's a participle, right? That verbal adjective. You can see it in action here. Burning ship. Now, that participle is accusative, feminine, and singular, right? It has a case, a number, and a gender. If we were to flip this into Latin, the word ship is feminine, so burning would be feminine. It's accusative because it's the direct object. It's the thing that Perseus saw, right? He saw the ship, or the burning ship would be your accusative direct object. And it's singular because there's only one ship, right? So burning is describing ship. And the case, number, and gender is, again, accusative, feminine, singular. That's what it would be if we flipped it into Latin. Here's another example of a present active participle. You could say something like, I saw Caesar marching to Rome. Marching is your participle, right? It comes from the verb to march, but here it's describing Caesar, right? So he's the one doing the marching. I'm not saying I'm marching, I'm describing him. So marching is your present participle. It's accusative because, again, that's the thing I saw. I saw Caesar, right? And really, I saw marching Caesar. So that's your direct object. It's masculine and singular because there's only one Caesar and he's a male, right? So that's the idea. So marching would be an accusative masculine singular participle if we were to flip this into Latin. Okay? So one thing you might have noticed as we did those two examples is we're translating the present participle with ing in English. That's the most common way to see it, right? Marching, burning, seeing, running, whatever it might be. So that's kind of a giveaway that there might be a participle involved in English. Okay? But let's take a look at what it would be in Latin. All right. So if you said Corneliam et Flaviam clamantes audivimus, you'd be saying we heard, right? Audivimus. We heard Cornelia and Flavia. That's my direct object, right? Corneliam et Flaviam. Simple enough. But it's not just that we heard Cornelia and Flavia. We're describing them as shouting, clamantes. Now, shouting is my present participle, right? And it's describing Corneliam and Flavia, right? Those are the two people that it's describing. So clamantes here is accusative, feminine, and plural. Okay. How do we know that? Well, there's two people here, Cornelia and Flavia. They're both girls, so it's feminine, and they're the direct object. That's who I heard or who we heard in this sentence. Okay. So clamantes is the accusative, feminine, and plural form. Okay. Here's another example. You have lupum ingentem puellas patentem conspeximus. So we caught sight of, conspeximus, we caught sight of a huge wolf, a lupum ingentem. And what's the wolf doing? It's patentem puellas. So patentem is describing the wolf. It's attacking the girls, right? It's not just a huge wolf, it's a huge wolf that's attacking. So again, it's the verb to attack, but in a describing form, an adjective form. That's why it's a participle. So here it's accusative, masculine, singular, right? Because it's describing lupum, right? It's a direct object because that's what we caught sight of, and it's masculine singular because we're talking about a wolf, and there's only one of them. Okay. So hopefully that makes some sense. We're seeing them in action here, right? Kind of understanding how they work. So one thing you do want to notice though, and kind of pay close attention to, is even though they're called present participles, they're actually happening at the same time of the main verb. That's really what they mean. So sometimes we call them same time participles. It doesn't necessarily mean it's happening in the present tense, which I know sounds kind of odd. So I would always encourage you to think of it as a same time as participle, if that makes sense. So let me show you an example here, right? If we go back to that that example we had of lupum ingentem puellas patentem conspeximus, conspeximus is perfect tense, right? So it's in the past, okay? Patentem is a present participle. Now that should look a little weird at first glance. You're like, wait a minute, the wolf is attacking someone in the present, but we saw them in the past. What's happening here? All we're saying is the attacking was happening at the same time as the seeing. Both of them are actually in the past. So in the past, when I saw this, conspeximus, the wolf was attacking in that present moment, if that makes sense. So that's the idea of a present participle. I think it's sometimes easier to describe as being a same time participle. It'll help you understand it a little better. In the other example we had puellas clamantes audimus, right? So here it's just saying we hear the girls shouting. We hear is present tense. Clamantes is a present participle. So these are happening at the same time. So the shouting is happening at the same time as the hearing, right? When I'm hearing it or we're hearing it, the girls are shouting. Both of these things are happening in the present moment. Okay, so that should give you a little bit of a sense of kind of what they are and how they work and what they look like in English and a little bit in Latin. But how do we actually form them, right? What does the Latin look like on this? So when we're dealing with present active participles, right, they come from all conjugations, right? Verbs of all conjugations. And you form them by taking the present stem of the verb. Remember, that's the infinitive without the RE. And you add NS for the nominative singular and NT for everything else, okay? So I'll give you a hint right now. The NS is a very specific ending. It's one you'll recognize, right? So if I were to say something like audiens, right, listening, the NS is specific to nominative singular. So when you see a verb form that's functioning as an adjective, it's a participle, and it ends in NS, it has to be nominative singular. The rest of them, again, are NT, and that NT infix is also something that's a red flag. And once you get used to it, it's a little easy to spot. Then you add on third declension adjective endings, which you already saw in the examples we did so far. They're using third declension adjectives, okay? So it's just taking the present stem, right, the infinitive without the RE, you add NS if it's nominative singular, NT for everything else. For the everything else category, right, everything except nominative singular, you add on third declension adjective endings, okay? And as a little pro tip, I'm not the first one to invent this or say this, but it is a good tip, right? The word present in English is a present participle, right? And it should help you understand the NT, right? So present, the NT in the word present is a giveaway that we're usually using NT when we're doing present participles in Latin, all right? So that might help you out. So here's an example, right? If I had porto portare, to carry, I would start with porta, right? I take portare and I drop the RE. So I have porta and I add NS. Portans means carrying. That's the nominative singular participle form. For everything else, I add NT. So portantis, right, is porta, which is my present stem, plus NT, plus my ending. IS is the genitive singular third declension adjective ending, right? So I just go down the line from there. So if it's NS, again, that's nominative singular, very specific. Everything else is NT plus a third declension adjective ending. Okay, so if we were to write them all out, it would look something like this. Porto portare becomes portans, portantis, portanti, portantem, and portanti, right? And then you go down the line with portantes, ium, ibus, ace, ibus. Okay, just filling in all the adjective endings that you know. So again, you can see the NT plays a really big role in present active participles. NS is just sort of the one-off that you'll probably spot as you go through Latin, okay? But it's really infinitive, drop the RE, add NT, add your third declension adjective endings, and you're off and running. You have a present participle. So here's some other examples for you, okay? Just to show they come from all the conjugations. So porto portare is a first conjugation verb. We got portans and portantis, meaning carrying. Maneo manere is a second conjugation verb, to stay. You'd get manens manentis, right, staying. Mito mitere is third conjugation, to send. You get mitanes, not mittens, always a funny word, but it's mitanes. Then mitentis, meaning sending. And then you have munio munire, which means to fortify, fourth conjugation verb. You have muniens and munientis. So again, you can do this with any conjugation verb. It'll always work. You can turn them into present participles. Hopefully that makes some sense, right? We're doing okay so far. We've seen how they work in sentences, right? The sort of ing translation in English. Now you saw a little bit on how to form them. So let's put it all together and do some quick examples just to help you out, okay? So here's our first example, and these come from the Road to Latin textbook, so they might be familiar if using that text. Otherwise, it's fine, just normal Latin sentences, okay? But we have Romulus, eos cernens et eorum clamores audiens gaudio motus est. So we have two present participles here. They're both modifying Romulus, who is nominative singular. So that's why we have cernens, right, seeing, and audiens, hearing. So the ns ending is being used because we dropped the re off our infinitive and we put ns because it's nominative singular, right? We're talking about Romulus. So we're saying Romulus, seeing them and hearing their shouts, was moved with joy, right? Again, Romulus is described as seeing and hearing. Those are the present participles, okay? Here's another one. You have Romulus, apud nobiles Romanos sedens et multa cogitans cum gaudio certamina spectavit. Okay, so Romulus sitting, sedens, among the Roman nobles and thinking, cogitans, many things, watched the competition with joy, right? Cum gaudio. So here again, we have Romulus described as sedens and cogitans. Those are both present participles. They're both nominative singular. That's why we have the ns ending. So again, that's the one that will always stand out and be the easiest one to spot. It's when you have a form of a verb being used as an adjective, right? A participle, and it has that distinct ns ending. That's how you know you're looking at a nominative singular present participle, okay? But let's break away from nominative singular. What would others look like? Well, here's another example, okay? So you have clamores patrum filias petentium undique audiuntur. So the shouts of the fathers, right? And it's not just the fathers, it's of the fathers looking for their daughters, filias, right? On all sides is heard, or is heard on all sides. So petentem there is a present participle. It's the verb to look, being used as an adjective, and it's describing patrum, the fathers. Here's the deal, case, number, and gender. Patrum is plural, it's genitive, and it's masculine, right? That's why we have petentium, which is using, again, the masculine genitive plural, third declension adjective ending. So we took petentem, right? You just took petere, peto petere. You drop the re, you have pete, right? We added nt, that's where you get petent, and then you added ium, petentium. Okay, there, it's the fathers looking for something. Again, it's just describing those fathers. Here's one more example. So we have daturne signum a Romulo stante, right? This is a question from the Road to Latin story. So you have the question is the signal given or being given, signum daturne, right? Is the signal given by standing Romulus? So you have a Romulo stante. So stante there is our present participle, right? It comes from sto stare, which means to stand. We have the nt as the infix, so we know we're dealing with the present participle, and we have an e on the end of it because it's describing Romulus, right? Who is ablative in this case, because we have a passive voice verb, datur, right? You have a Romulo, it's masculine ablative singular. So stante is masculine ablative singular. So again, it's just matching up. You do case, number, and gender. You know how to form it. You match it up, and you're in a pretty good spot. Remember, you're translating as ing, right, when you're dealing with present active participles. So hopefully that makes some sense, right? You're able to understand this without too much trouble. I know it's not perfect, but it's just a guide to get you through. Your next step is to practice. It's the only way you're going to get better. Just keep practicing till you're really good at these, okay? But let's just do a quick recap. So to recap present participles, we want to remember what a participle is. It's a verbal adjective. And again, that's kind of an odd thing to say. It doesn't always make a ton of sense to my students until we work it through. But again, verbal adjective, it comes from a verb. So it's a form of a verb, and it's used to describe things, right? So in other words, it's an adjective. So an example of that would be saying something like the closed door cannot be open. Closed is describing the door. It's a participle. Okay. Present participles, they happen at the same time as the main verb. So that's a key thing I want you to think about. It doesn't mean it's happening in the present tense. It just means it's at the same time as whatever tense the main verb is. Okay. So if my main verb's tense is in the past, when I use a present participle saying, hey, in the past, this was happening at the same time. That's what it represents. Okay. So always try to sequence those tenses out and make sure you understand what they mean. We translate present participles with ing in English. We've seen that a lot. So the ing is the giveaway rather, and you can spot present participles pretty easily by the ns ending, which is really distinct, right? You'll know what it is, or the nt ending, which is also pretty distinct as well. And remember, the word present might help you out. If you remember that present, which is a participle, present participle, ends in nt, you'll be in a pretty good spot. Okay, so there's only so much you can learn from watching a video, but hopefully this made some sense. Your next step should be to go practice this. I would recommend Magistrula. Again, I don't own Magistrula. I have nothing to do with it. I'm just a big fan. I use it all the time. So that would be my pro tip to you. Go fire up Magistrula, set it to give you 1,000,000 present active participles, and you'll be an expert at this in no time. The more you practice it and the more you recognize seeing it and forming them yourself, the easier it will be for you. But present participles are everywhere in Latin, so you really want to make sure that you have a strong handle on them so that you're able to move forward and feel really comfortable and confident with whatever comes your way in your Latin class. Good luck.